But yeah, Dave, it was funny when I looked at the presentation schedule and I thought, this is great. Everybody's going to come back from lunch, and I'm kind of used to lulling people to sleep. So make yourself comfortable. And as Dave said, the exciting part is over now. So today I thought it's actually really funny because I look at FDIM presentations and I think they're just always just knocked out of the ballpark. And this morning, every time I've watched someone present, like uh, Jack or Hans or Ashar or Cliff, I kind of think, wow, I'm glad I'm not right after them. And so I'm glad that lunch was there. And though it shows a lack of judgment being asked to present here today, I'm really honored. And I'd like to thank everybody that makes 4 Days in May possible. I think this is the most amazing conference on the planet. I love it. It tickles all of my QRP bones, and I love coming here, so thank you. So if you know me, you know I'm not a very technical person. I'm not an engineer or anything, so I thought I'd keep my presentation less like something you would probably hear from some of the better presenters. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I can offer you. And I gave this some thought, and I kind of thought it'll be something, a pay for what you get presentation. And I did some math. I did some math for this. And I looked at it and I thought, how many presenters are there and how much did you pay to come here? And this is the most math I ever do on my calculator. I couldn't do this in my head. So $35 is what people pay for this session. There are 7 really good presenters. And so that's $4.37.5 for this presentation, but let's just say it's $4.38, okay? And so my job is to at least give you $4.38 of a presentation, if I can make that happen somehow. Also, there's a little trigger warning that you should have, and now that Cliff's kind of warmed you up for it, actually, this is it's the truth. And I think this is something that we as QRPers get all the time. We have experts tell us what can be done and what can't be done. And so we may be countering some of what you've learned from some of the experts today. And I have a tendency to be a bit of an enabler, people tell me, when it comes to buying radios. And I do have some pretty pictures of radios in here. And so I'm sorry about that. You may want to do something to make sure you don't buy anything on your phone. Actually, don't give your credit card to anyone else, okay? That's probably a really bad idea, you know. I think to me, I've been a ham radio operator now for 27 years. And in that time, I've been a QRPer pretty much the whole time because I wasn't someone who jumped into the world of amateur radio with, just getting a 100-watt rig, running 100 watts in my shack, and then later discovering QRP. I was really fortunate enough that this guy, unfortunately, couldn't be here today, Mike Hansgen, K8RAT, walked into a Radio Shack where I was working. Right after I graduated, got my undergraduate degree, my wife was doing her MFA in film at Ohio University. And like the only job I could find in Athens, Ohio, Radio Shack. And the truth is, Radio Shack was my candy store growing up. And so I'd spent so much money there, I thought it'd only be fair if they paid me a little bit. But actually, it wasn't all that great at retail sales, comes to find out, because I didn't really care about commissions and things. I just wanted to help people find stuff. So I was the only guy in the Radio Shack that would follow people to the back of the store to find their transistors, resistors, capacitors, and all those other things they were looking for, those kind of low commission items. And one fellow that walked in one day was Mike Hansgen, and he was looking for some components. I was helping him find him, and I said, "What are you doing with these?" And he's like, "Well, I'm an amateur radio operator, and I've got a project I'm working on." And he looked at me and he said, "Are you a ham?" And I said, "Soon. I've been studying for my license to do my novice and my tech license. And I think I'm about ready to take the exam. And I've been looking at some exam sites here in the next month or two." And he said, "Oh, well, I've got something for you to do this weekend. I'm meeting with a few friends, and we're doing this thing called freeze your butt off. And I was like, I was thinking, I don't know what he's talking about here. And he said, no, FYBO, it's an amateur radio thing, and we go out in the field, and you get extra points for how cold it is. And so I was like, hey, yeah, sign me up. That sounds fantastic. And so I went to the Athens County Fairgrounds, and there was one of the big picnic shelters. Some hams were in there operating. I saw Mike there operating his Scout, turned down, of course, to QRP levels. And he came over and greeted me and introduced me to this guy, Eric McFadden, who happens to be back here in the room right now. Yeah, so you can't hide. And Mike was explaining to me, so the thing we're into in amateur radio is QRP, which is low power operating. And he was telling me, Eric's operating with 5 watts of power, and he's making all these contacts in CW. And then I saw his station, and I was hooked, because to me, this looked just like so amazing. Such small gear, he was making contacts all over the place. I thought it was really amazing. And by the way, on the proceedings page, somehow my images got cropped incorrectly in the pages. So if you don't mind, you can get your pen out and actually just draw the rest of the image on the page when you see it. But this is the Index Lab QRP Plus, and that had really stuck out in my mind. So from the very beginning, I was interested in QRP, and that was my main goal in amateur radio. So much so did I like this QRP Plus that recently I bought one that someone gave me a really good deal on, and I love it. And it was kind of fun on the way over here. Eric got to be reunited with that radio and do an activation with it. It was a lot of fun too. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the myths and facts, things I've encountered along my QRP journey, but mostly some myths here. And a lot of it's going to echo what Cliff said so amazingly well earlier. QRP is like operating with your hands tied behind your back. That's one of the things, it was literally the first thing I heard from a non-QRPer before I got my license, actually. So I went to a club meeting before I had my license, met a guy, a really nice fellow who's a silent key now. And turns out he lived not too far from where my wife and I lived, and he invited us over to his house to meet his wife, and he was going to show me a shack. And he literally built his house around his shack. His shack was the most important thing in the house. And he probably had $100,000 worth of gear, equipment, antennas, amplifiers. Everything was wired up to run his shack. And I didn't know it at the time, but he was a contester and a DXer. And he took me aside and he said, Tom, I heard that you're interested in QRP. I would strongly discourage you from doing that because it's like operating with your hands tied behind your back. And it was a little, it deflated me a little bit. I was thinking, maybe he's right, I don't know. But I saw how much fun Mike and Eric were having, and I just kind of ignored him and went forward with it. And I have to say, I've been so pleased because I have found the joy and the challenge of QRP has made it so much fun to operate, and all the surprising things that come along as I was operating. Another myth I encountered very early on, because I wasn't a CW operator, I had to learn 5 words per minute to get my novice exam, but I wasn't operating it a whole lot, and I worked a lot of single sideband, and people told me, single sideband QRP, that is futile. I mean, literally, you're not going to make any contacts with it. And I didn't have any other thing to do because I'm kind of, since I'm not I know enough about electronics to catch things on fire and to avoid warranties. And that was what my expertise was when I was a kid. My mom and dad would say, do you have to avoid everything that we have, every warranty we have in the house? And that's sort of what I do. So I kind of just try things and just do things in order to test theories. And with single sideband, really the chance I had to really test that was in national parks in the air, which I thought was a really amazing program back in the day. And it was actually on the way to 4 Days in May in 2016 that Eric wanted to stop along the way and do some activations. And I knew about National Parks in the Air, but earlier that year, my family life was so busy, I just didn't get into it. And then I got hooked on it on the way over here, having done, I don't know, 2 or 3 activations. And all of my activations were single sideband. And because I didn't feel confident enough with my CW skills to do more than that. And I also got the Elecraft KX2, which is one of the dangers of going to Hamvention when they release a new radio from Elecraft. I ordered one actually immediately after Hamvention. I went to Canada for 2 months. So I wasn't able to activate any national parks up there. They weren't doing that program that year. I could only hunt. And I came back and had ordered the KX2 to actually review it for it was for Spectrum Monitor magazine. And Elecraft had offered to loan me one. And I was like, yeah, I know how that goes, because I did that with the KX3 and immediately bought it from them. And so I did the same thing with the KX2. I just said, I'm just going to buy it. I'm not going to bother with this whole loaner thing. It's not going to work. I had so much fun with that radio operating single sideband during National Parks in the Air. I think basically between August and December, I think I activated roughly 90 parks during that time, 90 activations. All of them single sideband, all of them somewhere between 5 and 10 watts of power. And I was working European stations and everything. And it just kind of really debunked that whole thing about single sideband doesn't work. I just don't believe that. And I also had my Elecraft KX3, which gets a little less field time after I got the KX2. But I found that single sideband worked for me. And I like single sideband, actually. The one thing, if I could give anyone a piece of advice, it would be to take a page from Bob Heil's book. And the late, great Bob Heil. If you want to Google, if you've never seen him present something about tailoring your audio for single sideband or for voice, you need to do that, because it makes a massive difference in your signal and your intelligibility on the other end. And so I had spent time tinkering with the KX2 and the KX3's TXEQ and my audio gain. And then a friend of mine, actually it was Mike, he had gotten like the Heil, I think it's called the Pro K2 set or something. It's the one for the Elecraft rigs. Having a good quality microphone really makes a huge difference when you're operating single sideband. But spend time doing that work up front, and you'll find that you'll make way more contacts. It's kind of amazing, the difference. It's almost like adding 50 or 60 watts worth of power if you do that properly. So try to do that. Also, another little hint. Told you this is going to be like, this is more like stream of conscious than anything here, but basically, if you're trying to break through a pileup as a QRPer, because that's also the thing I've been told you can't do as a QRPer, is bust through a pileup. And I'm going to call BS on that, because all you have to do, I've been using the Elecraft KH1 recently a lot. And it's a handheld, I've got it in my bag back there. It's a handheld radio with a 4-foot telescoping whip, a little counterpoise, and it's about as small and compact as a radio can be, and it's really low power. But I bust through pileups all the time with it, because basically all you have to do is shift your frequency a little bit. And what I tend to do, a lot of people use the XIT function on radios. I don't actually do that. And the reason I don't do it is I like to tune off the frequency enough that I can hear the difference of what the other side's going to hear. It may be in reverse, but I can hear how far off of 0 beat I'm going to vary my tone a little bit compared to everyone else in the pileup. I do that, and I also vary my speed. And sometimes I'll go a little faster or a little slower. Like maybe instead of 20 words per minute, if everybody's sending that, I'll go down to 16, or I'll go up to 24, because the activator on the other end, sometimes that just comes through a lot better for them. And actually, it's the same thing in single sideband. You can do that as well if you're operating single sideband. Vary your speed that you're delivering the, that your exchange or your call sign, and also shift the frequency slightly. So your single sideband sounds a little bit more like it was in one of those X-Wing fighter battles in Star Wars. That's what you want that audio to sound like, is a little off, but still intelligible. And it makes a really big difference. I'll try, this particular myth right here could be an entire presentation for me. And since I only have 3 hours to do this, I'll refrain from it. Compromised antennas don't work. And I think I've been really lucky on my YouTube channel, on QRPer.com. It tends to collect good people. And I think it's probably because I've made my YouTube channel about as algorithm proof as it can be. I kind of make my videos in a way that doesn't appeal to the YouTube algorithm. So the people who find me are the people who actually want to be there. So I don't get a lot of troll comments or anything, but I do get schooled a lot. And I'll have people contact me and they give me their advice. And actually, I like to take that in. I've learned some really good things from it because I take criticism very constructively, which I think actually all of it's really meant to be. But when people start telling me that compromised antennas don't work, it does kind of get me going a little bit because I really think that compromised antennas only compromise your faith in antenna theory. And really, the important part with compromised antennas that I found is actually practicing, actually going out and using them, right? Try it before you knock it. And with antenna that really kind of started it for me, I had this idea one day to not take an antenna with me to a park, but to buy it along the way. And I took my KX2, no, it wasn't the KX2, it was the X5105 from Xiegu. I took it with me. I took a BNC binding post adapter, and I went by a Walmart because it was on the way to Lake James State Park, and picked up some speaker cable, just like speaker wire, zip cord stuff. I think it was 18 gauge or something. And I went to the park. I measured out 28.5 feet. I pulled the zip cord apart, put one in the red side of the binding post adapter and one in the black. The black one, of course, is the counterpoise, which I threw on the ground. The red one I put up in a tree, and I had a fantastic activation. It was a lot of fun. And really my point was, if you have a radio with a built-in ATU, or you have an ATU where you can do the matching with it, a really simple way to get on the air is just get two pieces of wire and match it. And it may not be the most efficient thing in the world, but it's going to work. And I had a fantastic activation with that, actually. But immediately after I posted the video and my field report, someone wrote me and told me the reason why that antenna doesn't work. And I said, did you watch my video, like, at all? I understand if you didn't, but like, I don't know if that activation could have gone any better. It was amazing. And but he just wanted to point out the inefficiencies of it. And I thought, well, I don't know if that really makes a difference with what I'm doing here. Another antenna that really got it for me was the Elecraft AX1. And I'll be honest here, I first learned about that antenna or saw it in person at the W4DXCC conference of all things. This is a DXing and contesting conference I attend on occasion in Sevierville, Tennessee, because a lot of my friends help run the show there. And I like learning a little bit about that side of amateur radio with DXing and contesting and stuff. And Eric with Elecraft showed me the AX1, and I looked at it and it looked like a toy, you know, and I thought, this is really cool, but I don't think it'll really work, you know. But of course I had to buy one. And so I purchased one in 2020. It probably sat in the box for 2 months. And one day someone asked me about it. Thomas, have you ever checked out the AX1? And I thought, oh, I've got one. I haven't even tried it. And I decided to make a video. And the goal of my video was to say, compromised antennas work, but they're going to give you compromised performance. And so I went to the Blue Ridge Parkway, probably one of the more activated parks, even back then in 2020 with Parks on the Air. I set up the antenna in about 2 minutes. It was so quick. I hopped on the air, and I just immediately started working one station after another station after another station, and I looked back at it, and I was like, this is the fastest, most efficient activation I've ever done. Like, I did the entire activation. I had it validated, and I kept going a little bit beyond that validation point of 10 contacts. But I had my 10 contacts in less than 10 minutes, and it took me 2 minutes to deploy it, 1 minute to pack it up. And I thought, oh, okay, I walked away from it, and I think even in the video I was kind of saying, I think I just was a little lucky today. And so it took me down the rabbit hole of the AX1 antenna and wanting to find the day that it didn't work very well. And so I started doing a lot of things with the AX1, including taking it under picnic shelters, down in valleys. On days when propagation wasn't looking very good, I took it out, and The dang thing kept working. It kept working so well that I remember writing some of my friends saying, like, why am I putting wires in trees right now? I do it because I love doing that. If you've watched my videos, I kind of have a dance of how I do my arborist throw line. And I love putting wires in trees, but if I'm being honest, if efficiency just for getting in and getting out were my thing, the AX1 tends to work. At this particular park, where this image is, this is at Zebulon Vance, a historic site near Asheville. And I remember once, I don't think it was this particular activation, but once I went out with my AX1, the KX2. I was actually meeting up with a friend there who wanted to check out the park and just kind of have a picnic. And I got there a little early and I thought, well, I'll just kind of pull this stuff out and work some stations. And I was under the middle of the roof of the picnic shelter. And as you can see, the mountains around it, it's in a valley. And one of my stations was Hungary, that I was working with 5 watts of power underneath under a shelter. And it kind of blew my mind. And that was a county hunter. So we actually had an extended exchange. I was telling him what my county was, which Buncombe is kind of long actually to spell out. And I sent him a picture later of the radio and the antenna. And yeah, he had a good antenna on his end, but he was like, wow, I can't believe that. You sounded just like all the other stations I've ever worked. But technically that shouldn't have worked, right? And I have used the AX1 with a wide variety of radios, just kind of tinkering with it, playing with it. I've paired it even with my Mission RG01. I turned down to 5 watts. And you can maybe just see it on the back of it there. That's also under a picnic shelter, which actually is a really cool thing about having a compromised antenna is you can put it in places you can't take other antennas. So I can go to urban parks where I may be a little nervous about putting up a big high-profile antenna, and I can use this antenna and no one's the wiser because it has no impact on anything. I mean, it's like pulling out a portable shortwave radio or something. And then one day I was at Tuttle Educational State Forest with the AX1, and that Tuttle has a huge, beautiful picnic shelter that I use a lot when it's raining. And I think it was raining this day. And I put my K2 under there and attached the AX1 to the back of it, lowered my power down to 5 watts. And one of the contacts I made was Stuart, M0TTQ, in Portsmouth, England. And what was really cool about it is my wife and I used to live just maybe not even an hour from Portsmouth when we lived in Surrey. And it was so great working him as my very first transatlantic park to park. And I was using the AX1 antenna. And my InFET half waves, as much as I've loved them, they had never done that for me. The AX1 did it for me. And that's what my QSO map looked like from that day. And when I go back and look at my AX1 contacts and my QSO maps, I really can't tell that that was the antenna I was using. It tends to show a propagation footprint that is like a normal antenna. Actually, I think one of the powers of the AX1 antenna is the fact that I actually work some stations that are a little bit more like an INVIS station too. So I can actually work kind of really local people at the same time I'm working people within my normal 40 or 20 meter propagation footprint. And so it just keeps working. I have never had a failed activation with my AX1 antenna, even though it's a compromised antenna. And sometime last year, someone wrote to me and said, the AX1 is nothing but a dummy load. And so I thought, I'm gonna test that theory too. And I kept taking it out. I paired it with my MTR3B that day, and I had a gangbusters, like really, really successful activation with it. And the MTR3B, I was feeding it with 9 volts, so I was getting about 3 watts out into this little tiny antenna on a tripod on a picnic table. And then last year, in early October, I had a little opening in my schedule. And for those of you who read my stuff, I'm sorry you do, but if you read it, you'll see that usually my activations are squeezed into my family life. I have a pretty active family life. And I thought I can either do 2 POTA activations today or I can do 1 SOTA activation. Well, almost always without fail, the SOTA is going to work if it's going to be if it's an option, I'm going to do SOTA because I love SOTA so much. But my ankle was a little sore that day. I didn't want to make it any worse. I didn't want to go to a summit that would be a super long hike. And frankly, I didn't have enough time. So I went to a summit called Black Balsam along the Blue Ridge Parkway. And Black Balsam doesn't, it's kind of a bald, it doesn't have a lot of vegetation on top of it other than like shrubs and heath and things like that and rocks. And the only radio I had with me was my KX2 and the AX2 antenna, which is the monoband version of the AX1 basically. And mine's set up for 20 meters, but of course you can change yours to other frequencies if you mess with the coil in it. But mine was set up for 20 meters. And I remember pulling out my little hiking chair, sitting down in it, getting my knee board, and putting the KX2 on there with the AX2 antenna on 20 meters. And I'm like, I've just limited myself to 5 watts, 4-foot antenna, and it's all, my whole station's sitting on my knee. I don't know how well this is gonna work, but let's just see. And I started activating, and you probably can't read the log sheet from here, but I got stations just pouring in. And the thing that really blew my mind was that day I worked YC2 VOC in Java Island, Indonesia, with a 4-foot antenna pumping out 5 watts of power on my knee. And it was so unbelievable. When I worked it, I thought, that can't be an Indonesian station. It's some Caribbean country I've never worked and I don't know the prefix of it, or I was telling myself all these things. And as soon as I finished the activation, I looked up this really kind ham in Indonesia, and I wrote him and I said, were you operating remotely or what was going on there? And he said, no, I was operating at home. I had an ICOM IC7300 with 40 watts of power into an OptiBeam antenna. And he said, I've been trying to chase you for a while. And the irony is that was actually a long path that I had. So it's not actually the path that you're seeing there. It was a long path that day. And I just kind of thought, you know, if the AX1 and AX2 are dummy loads, they're kind of crappy dummy loads. They're super leaky. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have to just do things, because sometimes what in theory sounds like it won't work, if you don't try it, it won't work. But if you just try it and have fun with it and keep your expectations out there, just experiment and have fun, which is what this whole conference is about, you're going to be in good shape. I am very much preaching to the choir. I know about this. So the truth is, yes, CW does make a difference when you are QRP. And I am a really big believer. In fact, I think I wrote this in the article I had in QRP Quarterly this last time. I'm a really big believer in make ham radio your own. You do not have to do one thing or another for someone else to prove that you're a ham radio operator. If you only want to do digital modes or voice or CW or whatever, you're a ham radio operator, and do it, make it your own and enjoy it. Don't let someone else dictate or tell you what you can or can't do to be a ham. You're a ham if you feel like you're a ham and you're doing stuff. But CW does make a difference. And I have to be honest that it made a really massive difference when I started doing CW activations with SOTA and POTA, of course. And you're just using more of that available power in a narrow bandwidth instead of spreading it out like you have to do for voice. But you can do things to optimize voice, but CW always just tends to work really well and get through. And you can use small, compromised, little tiny transceivers and have a blast with them when you're using CW, and that is one of the great things. And this wise man once told me, and his name's Dave, NM0S, in one of the adventures he was mentioning that we've been on together, we both presented at a conference called Hackers on Planet Earth in New York City in 2018. We both were presenting completely different topics, but Dave and I roomed together at the Hotel Pennsylvania, just like the Glenn Miller song. And we were talking about, I was talking to him about the fact I was getting a lot of questions on one of my websites about people who wanted to buy gear mainly for preparedness reasons, but they just wanted the gear so they could take it, seal it up in a trash can, and leave it alone. They weren't operators, they just wanted to have access to it in case something went really south. And Dave said, and I thought this was great, he said, you know, I always tell my Boy Scouts when I'm working with them that to accomplish a goal, you need skills and you need tools usually. And you can't just have all of one or the other. And I think of it like you could be a really skilled arborist, but if you don't have a saw or an axe or chainsaw or something like that, it's gonna be hard to fell a tree. And also you can have a lot of tools. You can have like the world's best sewing machine, but if you've never sewn before and you don't know how to thread the needle, you're going to have a lot of trouble doing that because that's a pretty high skill thing to do. CW definitely falls on that side of skill, but when you do the skill part, it makes the tools like easier and more simple because sort of the benefits you get from digital modes and those weak signal modes is that you've got this computer that's there and it can really detect these weak signals. Well, you've got like a computer and a filter in your head that can do that as well. And when you learn CW, of course, you're able to really take advantage of that. And it makes the radios more simple, easier to use. And I know that if you are one of the people in the room that's now learning CW or you're thinking about learning CW, I'll be honest with you, I think everyone feels at first it's a bit of a brain strain and a pain, but then something happens along the way where it becomes the opposite of that. And I don't think there's a lot of things we do. Like I ride a bike a lot. I have an exercise bike when the weather's bad. I do a lot of bike riding. I love being outdoors and doing mountain biking, and I enjoy every moment of that. With my exercise bike, as I do it, I build up my endurance and everything, but it never feels like it's just effortless, you know? And CW becomes, for me, it becomes like this refuge on the air where it's this place that's quiet, where you're with other people. They're like-minded and fun to make contact with. And I don't know, it puts me in a really peaceful mood. And I would have never guessed that because I always thought it would be a brain strain all the time. I'm trying to figure out what's being sent to me and keeping up with it. And it just gets easy because your brain just kind of does its brain thing and that's it. I really do believe anyone can learn CW. And I would argue right now that we are going through a CW renaissance. And I bet that there are more people learning and people who have recently learned CW than there was when I first started in amateur radio in 1997, before the code was even dropped from the exam, because so many people want to take advantage of hopping on the air and taking all the advantages that you get with CW. Isn't that a beautiful key? Key is so photogenic. And what did it for me really to really up my game with CW was Parks on the Air. Because in 2020, I started, I think, Parks on the Air in probably 2019. As always with these things, Eric was first to beat me to it and really kind of the one to encourage me to get into it. By encourage, he just took me on an activation and then I was hooked. And in the very beginning of Parks on the Air, it was challenging. Those of you who were doing it then, you would go out to the field and you just hoped you got your 10 that day. And you may be out there an hour or longer trying to get your 10 because there are just a lot less hunters, orders of magnitude less hunters than there are now. And so it could be really challenging. And I once went out to a park doing single sideband. I drove 2 hours to it. It was an all-time new one. Most of them were all-time new ones around where I lived. And I really wanted to activate this park. And I went out there and I called CQ for 2 hours. And I even had friends looking for me on the air, listening for my voice. They knew where I was going to be, but they couldn't hear me. There wasn't a path open. Propagation wasn't great. And I couldn't spot myself because there was like no cell phone coverage, no nothing. And on my drive back that evening, I thought, what could I do to fix this? I know people use APRS, but I don't think it's really available out here to do their spotting. I could get a Garmin inReach device or something, but if I do that, that's not really a radio answer. I really wanted to use like an amateur radio answer to it. And of course, CW was the thing to do because when you learn CW and you start operating with it, then the reverse beacon network functionality with both the Summit program and the Park programs will automatically spot you most of the time. It works most of the time. And so I set a goal for myself to really feel comfortable hopping on the air. And I think I started that probably mid-May, probably around the time, it may have been a little bit later than that, probably around the beginning of June. I worked throughout June just kind of practicing my code, getting it back up to speed. I used Moore's Runner on my PC and practiced listening to pileups because that scared me to death to think about a pileup. And then one day, before I could talk myself out of it, I took my dog. That's my like emotional support animal at this point with CW. I took her out. I took my KX2, a key, and I thought I'm going to activate Blue Ridge Parkway. And I was afraid people would hear me and respond, so I used like a low power, tiny antenna. I was thinking I kind of want people to respond, but I really don't want a lot of people to respond. And I set myself a goal too that I'll tell you about, but I had a successful activation. I sweated my way through it. And actually the sort of the thing I was going to do for myself, and this is called self-motivation, K4SWL style, is I said I'll get an MTR3B if I activated that park in CW. That was the dangling carrot for me. And the funny part was, after I did that activation, I felt $1 million. Hazel did too. She really gets into this stuff. And every time, I think for the next 5 times I went to the field, I had this question of, what if I go out there and I just forget CW? Like, I just forget everything. And I really thought that. And I'd hop on the air, I'd get in the moment, my brain would key in, and I was like, oh, this is kind of fun, actually. And, you know, I felt like I'd done something when I did it, like I'd accomplished a hike or something. And sort of, it was history from there. I just really, really loved it. And I kept trying to do things with CW. Then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this thing called the 5-watt challenge. And in 2021, I want to make sure, because I do radio reviews where I have to test the radios at higher output power than QRP for the review. So I can't say I'll only do 5 watts, but I said I'll activate and validate all of my activations with 5 watts of power. And that was such a non-challenge that, like, I just continued doing that. There was no challenge to that at all. I found 5 watts was just, it did everything I wanted it to do. It was never an issue. And so some of my radios aren't capable of putting out a full 5 watts. This KX3, this is Ruby, my KX3, KX1, sorry. And she can only put out about 3 watts, 3.5 watts probably on most of the bands. And I took her out and I went to Blue Ridge Parkway this day, and I remember that I worked stations in Canada, all over North America, and also worked Alaska with just 2 pieces of wire hooked straight up to her, like you see right there. That was from that activation. And I thought, okay, well, 3 watts seems to work pretty well too. And then I thought, well, let's just go a little lower. And I started doing activations, and I hesitate to do some things on video because if you were in Cliff's presentation, you put yourself out there when you do videos. You've got someone looking at everything you're doing. And I thought, I don't want to, I know every time I do something, someone's going to come back and say, well, I tried that and it didn't work. But I thought, I want to try 1 watt. And so I did an activation with 1 watt and found it worked just as well as using 5 watts. And my KX2, you see in a lot of these pictures, it is like really one of my favorite field radios ever made. But it also has incremental power changes. So you can like knock the power down like by 1/10 of a watt once you go below 1 watt. Not a lot of radios do that. And so I started lowering it a little further down to like 100 milliwatts. And I did an activation, and I thought, I'm going to be out here forever trying to make this activation work. It's so low in power that even the signal strength meter, when you're doing the power output meter, was just showing 1 little segment every time I was keying. And I had a normal activation, just a completely normal activation after that. And the truth is, and some people will say, oh, you know, you're kind of a popular YouTuber guy, and that's the reason you get contacts. But I've done this stuff in Canada with my Canadian call sign, I don't think that hardly anybody knows, and it worked just fine. So really the trick is just get out there and try it. It's kind of crazy, and it's the reason we do QRP stuff. Speaking of which, I've only got 2 more hours left. Speaking of which, I'm actually getting ready to wrap this up. Operating QRP in remote locations blows my mind. It really, really does. To me, going and hiking out, you know, for 2-3 hours to a site that feels super remote to me, and then hopping on the air, and here's this community of awesome people that I'm connecting with, because to my radio, I'm not that remote. And I have to keep remembering that. I think it's really amazing, and I think it's something to be appreciated when you go out. And really the key with QRP that I think a lot of people that say life's too short for QRP is that they don't realize how portable being QRP makes everything. Because like my MTR3B, the whole kit with my antenna with everything weighs nothing, and it fits in my backpack, and it's so easy to pull out and work. And that's just something that's really hard to do with larger radios, as you know. I mean, like I said, preaching to the choir here. My daughters like to joke with me about stuff, a lot. Actually, that's the thing about having two teenage daughters is there's a certain amount of humility, I guess, one works up. I like, I'm kind of at their mercy most of the time, and they pick on me relentlessly. But trees don't look the same after you start doing a lot of radio work in the field, especially if you live in a place with trees like I do in North Carolina. Even our tallest summits have trees on them, most of them. So I use a lot of throw lines in places where they allow using lines and trees. I use throw lines. And when I'm hiking with my daughters, they'll see me looking up into the trees and they're like, "You're looking for an antenna location, aren't you?" You're like, guilty. I do that even when I'm driving down the interstate. I'll see a branch and I'm like, "God, that'd be a great place to put an end-fed half wave." How many other people do that? Yes. Yes, you know what I'm talking about. It just changes your perspective. And I think that's what happens with QRP in general. It changes the way you see everything around you. And it's for that reason that you don't want to forget to stop and smell the RF from every once in a while. And by that, I really mean like the full experience of doing field radio. So enjoy that time on the air, enjoy what you're doing, enjoy doing something that's so extraordinary that 99.99% of the people that you encounter on a daily basis, unless you go to a ham radio club meeting or something, or FDIM, have no clue what you're even doing. It's so extraordinary, so unique. Appreciate that and enjoy that. And don't forget to enjoy where you are too, because I don't care if I'm under a really thick canopy of trees in the middle of the forest, or if I've got a view like this over Linville Gorge where I'm activating. Just enjoy that experience and know that it is very much, you know, a privilege to do it. And so embrace your QRP-ness, your weirdness, and really go with it and experiment and have fun. And that is really what I think it's taught me from day one, being an amateur radio operator. And I'm just grateful that I went down this path because I love it so very much. That's pretty much it, actually. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I'll find somebody to answer them for you. We got a lot of good people in here for that.
You didn't say much about the power sources that you were using.
Yeah, so I tend to use a lot of my radios that have, like the Elecraft radios tend to have like their own battery packs. And I tend to use those because they fit really well in the radio. They last a really long time in the radio. A lot of times though, like my MTR3B, and this really blows my mind, I use lithium 9-volt batteries in a normal 9-volt configuration, like a typical 9-volt battery, that's a lithium ion cell. And it was actually Adam K6ARK that told me that this actually worked really well with the MTR3B because it's so efficient. But I'll charge those up, and each one of those 9-volt cells will usually give me like 2, maybe 3 activations out of one charge. And 2 of those batteries, I think, cost $10. My kind of staple battery that I use, though, is a 3 amp hour lithium iron phosphate battery. I find that it's lasts me through several activations with most of my QRP radios. It'll power any QRP radio I have. I find it's kind of the sweet spot in terms of size and weight when I'm doing, you know, parks on the air and things like that. Again, with SOTA, I'll try to go smaller along the way, but those tend to be the power sources I use.
I had an antenna question, but a portable pack based on 18650s that I can easily charge with a 20-watt solar panel if I'm going backpacking has made my 817 very happy. My question is, you were talking about the AX1. I'm right now in love with my spark plug at end-fed half wave, just for the weight. But for the longest time, I would be going around with manual screwdrivers, super antenna, Wolf River coils, and in spite of the weight, I would take them. I had a lot of trouble trying to get them to work, and I was biased against the end-fed. And I don't know exactly how the AX1 is put together, but I would imagine my manual screwdrivers should work pretty similarly. And right now, my little spark plug is blowing it away, so I'm having fun, but I don't know why I'm having fun. And since you've used a whole bunch of antennas, a couple words of your experience wisdom I'd appreciate.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I I love antennas, and I think one of the greatest things about antennas is not only do we have a lot of really good commercially available antennas like AX1s and PACtennas and Tufton antennas and all these other antennas out there, but they're easy to build. And so I like every activation when I go out, I like to pair up a different antenna with a different radio when I can. Except for my little field packs I keep in the car all the time. I may use the same things over and over, but I like to pair up different antennas. I find that pretty much any of them, especially if you live in the eastern half of North America, I think pretty much any of them are going to get the job done if you're doing an activation. If your goal is DX or something, then you need to think about your antenna very carefully. But for the most part, I find anything works. I think that what it really amounts to with a lot of the field work I do is convenience. And if I've got time, I'm going to put up a bigger antenna and have fun with that. If I don't have time, or I'm in a place where I'm not allowed to put up a big antenna or a high profile antenna, then I'll go with something smaller. I do think screwdrivers work really well. They are sort of like these trapped and loaded coil base antennas. They have a high Q. So you really do need some other kind of matching thing to help you, because if I'm activating on the top of Mount Mitchell and I get a really good match with my 20 meter, AX1, when I go to the coast of North Carolina, I guarantee you that my body capacitance, the topography, everything will change the dynamics of it. And I need something to help out with that impedance match. So those antennas, that's one of the tricks with them, is you need something to do that. I've actually just built a little capacity hat that I can stick on and play with it and usually get a good SWR out of it. But I will say this one thing about the AX1, because I get a lot of questions about this antenna because I've taken it out a lot, is I'm sure your mileage varies based on where you live. If you live in Perth, Australia, or you live in Western Samoa, or Alaska, or maybe even the Pacific Northwest, I hear a lot of people tell me it's hard to use it there. You do have to think that when I'm usually operating in the eastern half of North America, and I've used the AX1 from southern Georgia to northeastern Quebec. And it has worked brilliantly every time. I've never had a failed activation when I've used the AX1. If you're in a remote location, you have to think about the density of amateur radio operators within your propagation footprint. And I have a lot in mind anytime I'm along the East Coast. I'm sure that if I lived in Hawaii, I probably would not use an AX1 for doing activations. It may limit me to who I can actually contact. I would want to use a higher gain, larger aperture, wire antenna or something. But I'd say with antennas, just try everything you can and experiment, and don't be afraid to just go give it a go with a random wire, resonant antenna, whatever you want.
Short question and a long question. What do you use for editing your YouTube videos? And can you talk a little bit briefly about your YouTube experience?
Wow, okay. So I don't do a lot of editing with my videos. I was just telling someone out here that I use Final Cut Pro because I'm kind of a Mac guy for what I do. And I use Final Cut Pro. I do very light editing. Really, it's just stitching together video chunks that my camera spits out to make sure that they're all one piece. But if you look at my videos, it's rare that there's even any edit in there at all. But I do use it for making my titles and stuff. And I really love Final Cut Pro. It does way more than I ever use. The truth is, I resisted doing YouTube videos for ages and ages because my wife, may have mentioned, got her MFA in film. And she did it really early in the days of digital video editing. And I helped her with her Mac G3 that we loaded out with the maximum amount of memory and storage space and everything for her to do her thesis film, which she shot in film, real film, like 16 millimeter, and transferred to digital. And that experience of watching her do all those edits and helping her technically with it, I was like, oh, I just can't do this stuff. I don't have time for it. And like Cliff said actually earlier, it takes a lot of time to do video editing. And I think it's kind of fun, but I just usually don't have time to do it, so I don't do that. With YouTube, I get questions from people all the time who want to start a YouTube channel. And I think I'm probably the worst person to ask for this. And I'm not joking. If your goal is to get subscribers, I'm probably not the best person. I usually don't ask people to subscribe or like my videos. I just throw them out there and I don't put any ads on them and I just let them be what they are. To me, they are a supplement to my field reports that I write on QRP. But I would say that if you want to keep your sanity, and you want to start a YouTube channel, if your goal is to increase subscribers, then you need to know how the YouTube algorithm works. I don't, because I think it is literally algorithm proof what I do. But you need to know what the things are, like the editing, the bumper music, all these things they look for, tight videos, look to do all that stuff. YouTube gives you advice with each and every video that you can look up, and it'll say, you know, more people like this video than like this video. More people seem to want this type of video out, and you can tailor your video to do that. But really, for sanity purposes, if you're doing it just to have fun, and this is what I do, it's like an education thing for me. I just enjoy sharing the experience. I get a thrill out of that. Because I watch a lot of travel videos for places I plan to travel, and I live vicariously through those people, and I kind of like videos that do that too. And so that's sort of what I kind of offer. But you'll go crazy if you know, the worst thing is, and I'm sure this has happened if there are any YouTubers out here, you'll work really hard on the video, you put it out, and it just doesn't get a lot of traction. You know, it just didn't resonate with people for some reason. But you just have to keep kind of doing it, you know, if you really like it, and make sure that you're doing it when you love it. And if you need to take a break, take a break. You know, never feel the pressure to do it. And I think in our amateur radio world, people find you when you're doing something that resonates with them.
Hey, there's a question on our Zoom chat. Is the small cubicle aluminum key shown with the MTR3B available?
I have gotten more questions about that key. So Larry, N0SA, I'm sure a lot of you know him, he produced that key, and he did a small run of them. And then he basically had CW Morse, which is an awesome company in Texas, had them make, he did a design for them, they started producing them. I think Larry still makes some small batches of keys like this, and you can contact him. And if there's going to be a production run, they're usually small ones, you can get on it. I can tell you that key is amazing. Like, I absolutely love it. I hear a lot of people talk about, and I actually have a Palm Pico, but I think that key is even better. I just like the finger pieces on it and everything. So, plus it's really photogenic in all the photos up here.
Counterpoise question.
Yeah.
I noticed in the pictures that didn't seem to be counterpoise connect with the KX2 and such. However, and that's not I shouldn't have said that. That's not a negative comment. Mm-hmm. That's a question. Is what I'm looking, I've used the AX1 across the country now several times. And what type of counterpoises do you use with the various antennas, various radios, mm-hmm. and how much of an orientation of the counterpoise do you find affects the signal?
So that's actually a really good question. With any antenna like the AX1, I always have a counterpoise attached. It helps the efficiency by orders of magnitude. You can probably make some contacts without it. You may be able to get a match, but you really do need that counterpoise. That is a really important component of the antenna system. So when you don't see it, it's usually just attached at the bottom of the radio and you just can't see the wire trailing out. I tend to use just like the one that Elecraft provides. I only use one. Some people will use as many as 3, and I think the more counterpoises, the better. I do think that once, for a lot of antennas, especially the larger antennas, once you have enough counterpoise that's on the ground, it's already coupled with the ground and doesn't need to be a whole lot longer. When you raise it, of course, then you need to make sure that you've got the right length of counterpoise. I think counterpoises are really important. When you're using things like end-fed half waves, make sure that you've got, if you want to have some counterpoise on it, you know, use a length of coax and then just uses the shield of it, of course, for the counterpoise. And if you do it without counterpoise, you connect your end-fed half wave directly to the radio, it can work really, really well. It's probably not quite as efficient, but it'll work. But also your body capacitance can have a little bit more variation with the SWR along the way. But most of our radios can handle that. But I think experimenting with counterpoises, I found that with the AX1, it really makes no difference how I've got it oriented. I don't see much of a difference at all on my QSO maps when I do that. But I think probably is time up now? I want to make sure I'm not intruding on anybody else's tape. Yeah, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.